Increasingly, both online and in real life, we hear people sounding like they're having mental breakdowns, like they're not connected to reality. Too much is happening, right? It's too much, too fast, in too many ways. It's sensory overload. What I posit is many people, especially 45 and younger, so that's younger Xers, millennials, and the oldest and eldest of Gen Z, regardless of race, but specifically for the sake of this conversation, black people are engaging in what I call extreme escapism. And the definition of escapism is the tendency to seek distraction and relief from unpleasant realities, especially by seeking entertainment or engaging in fantasy. Emphasis on the engaging in fantasy. So I'm going to play a couple of clips for you guys, and we'll come back on the back end of that, and I'll give my commentary. So we'll pause right here.
I guess for people who haven't seen the movie yet, I guess if I could describe it, you cover the last 40 years or so, and there's a lot of fascinating threads that you tease out. But if there's an overarching theme, I guess it's that the world we're living in now is one where the line between fantasy and reality, between politics and entertainment, is now been almost thoroughly erased, and we're all existing in these kind of synthetic realities. Would you say that's a fair assessment?
I would say semi-synthetic reality, but yes, that's a reasonable assessment. I mean, what I was trying to argue in that film, by going back into the past and coming back to the present, was to show how so many different groups in society, faced by growing complexities, retreated from trying to deal with those complexities, and for different reasons invented a simplified version of the world, which increasingly became detached from reality. And what I was trying to argue is this wasn't just the politicians. I mean, they did do that, and they did it to hang on to power, and they created fictions and they lied in order to hold on to that power. But we, liberals, ordinary people, right-wing people, also retreated. We're also, complicit in this. And I think that was one of the things I was trying to say in the film is we're all living in a rather strange, it's not really fantasy world. It's a world that we all know in the back of our heads, that it feels slightly odd, slightly unreal, and sometimes downright fake. But because there isn't anything else, we just sort of accept it. And I was trying to get at that. I was trying to bring that feeling that people have in the back of their minds forward, and then say, I'm going to try and explain why we feel like this.
Do you think it's a kind of a sense of helplessness?
No, I think it's a feeling that, I mean, the why I called it hypernormalisation, it's a phrase I borrowed from a Russian writer who was writing about what it was like in the Soviet Union in the 1980s. As when we look back now, we can see that the Soviet Union was collapsing. And he argued that people living in the Soviet Union at that time knew that those in power didn't know what was happening, knew that those managing the plants were corrupt and greedy and stealing from it, knew that actually the whole system was based on lies and fakery. But because there was nothing else, that was all there is, they just accepted it as normal. And he coined the phrase hypernormalisation to describe this sort of slightly, it's not helplessness, it's a sort of enervated state. You know that it's not quite right. But because you haven't got anything else to compare it with, a sort of benchmark, as you were, to say, that, look, this is real and this is fake, because you haven't got that, you just sort of feel slightly jittery. It's like, you know those moments in sci-fi movies where suddenly a bit of reality breaks through and then goes back again, like that. It's sort of like that. And I was trying to explain why there was that enervated feeling at the moment.
So this is from an interview with Adam Curtis from a few years ago. And what Adam Curtis, the documentarian from Britain, is saying is, in his own words, the world is growing so complex, the intensity, the speed at which it's growing complex, the change that is happening is causing people to retreat to simplified, emphasis on this part, alternative realities. It reminds me of Kellyanne Conway's alternative facts, right? I also want us to pay attention to the part where he says detached from reality, right? Which in other words is living in a fake fantasy world. If you're detached from reality, you are living in a fake fantasy world, right? So I want us to pause right here. Let's speak about some other things.
Well, I'm glad you brought up science fiction and movies, because one of the metaphors that you reach for from science fiction is you talk about the Strugatsky brothers and their book Roadside Picnic, which was then made into the film Stalker.
Yes, that's right.
Could you explain the metaphor of the zone and how that kind of describes the state that you're talking about?
Well, again, this is about the Soviet Union. The Strugatsky brothers were two science fiction writers who, really from the 1960s, grabbed the imagination of young Russian, Soviet people. Well, they were Russian people in the Soviet Union. And what they did is, in a way, they became the closest to express the disenchantment, because there was no political opposition, because everything was sort of normal, but it felt odd. What the Strugatskys did was somehow find a way of explaining that, or bringing that forward into the imagination through science fiction stories. And they wrote this book, which I think is wonderful. And actually, and this is a terrible thing to say to cineasts, but I think it's sort of better than the film. They wrote this book called Roadside Picnic, where it's a world like ours, but somehow set in the future. And except in the middle of it, there's this area called the Zone, which is as if someone from an alien force had come once upon a time, visited, and now gone. But if you go into the Zone, it's very strange. Things change. Reality sort of morphs. Shadows go the wrong way. You're never quite sure which direction you're going in, and you can never be sure what's real and what's not real. And what the Strugatskys, I think, were trying to do with that book was say, this is what the Soviet Union has become. It's become a sort of weird, strange place that everything. A lot of things are unreal, a lot of things are fake, and a lot of things are very odd and sort of slightly out of phase. But because there's nothing else around you, you just accept it. You're in the zone. And that's what I meant. It's normal, but it's hypernormal because it's not quite real. And that's the zone we're in. And what I was trying to argue in the film, I'm not trying to say that we're like the Soviet Union in any way, but what we do share is a feeling that we're at the end of something, because so much around us, I mean, we know this ourselves, is that there are lots of people who do bad things. Bankers who have, it's been clear that they have done really bad things, but practically no one is prosecuted. There are sort of politicians lie to us, and we know that they're lying, and they know that we know that they're lying, but then nothing happens. It's this sense that we know that it's all a bit odd, but then nothing happens as a result of it. So we accept it as normal, but we know it's wrong. And that's what I was trying to get at. And that's sort of what the Zone is about. And if I was going to be what we British call plonky and sort of make my film what I was trying to say a little more obvious, we're sort of in the Zone now. We know that it's all a bit unreal, but we can't see anything else. So we're stuck within it. And I mean, a lot of the politicians, the mood that is leading to things like Brexit and Trump come from that sense of dissatisfaction, of sort of an enervated state of jitteriness, that we know it's wrong, but we haven't got anything else that we know is real to grab onto and say, we want that. So we grab for the closest bit of, I don't know, vaudeville that we find in order to push it a bit.
Another sort of semi-real zone that you discuss in this movie is cyberspace. And you just talk about another science fiction writer, the American William Gibson, who coined that term. And again, it's this effect of prescience in science fiction to describe a world that we're now living in. Could you talk a little bit about William Gibson's view of cyberspace?
Yeah, Gibson's really, I mean, you're right. Science, if you look at the period we've lived through, the last 30, 40 years, the left sort of collapsed, but it's through culture that you get critiques. And above all, I mean, it may be because I like science fiction, but I do think science fiction has played quite a big role in this in all sorts of ways. And I do think Gibson's really important, because Gibson comes up I think it's in 1984, he writes the series of books. In
the Sprawl trilogy. The
Sprawl trilogy, they're called. They're set within this world of the Sprawl, a world of the future. In that world, people can, I suppose it is a bit like going into the Zone again. People can actually jack in, as he calls it, to what cyberspace. He calls it cyberspace. He invents that term, and it's the world of connected computers. He's seen at that point, this is 1984, that you can conceptualize in the imagination the world of interconnected computers, of networks, as another world, and he calls it as another space, and he calls it cyberspace, and his heroes, or anti-heroes, go into that world. What's really interesting about what Gibson does, and which is why I think he's really important, is that he was writing in the midst of the Reagan era, when what was happening was government and the power of government to shape the world was receding, and the power of giant corporations, and above all of finance, was rising up to replace them. And Gibson's vision in those books is quite a dark one. It's that what he describes as cyberspace is a world where politics, law, none of that plays any role. What you do is you move through these giant blocks of what he calls them ice. They're blocks of information which are secured by the most terrifying protection systems, but you can jack into them if you're clever enough. But if you're not quick enough, your mind will get mangled.
They'll literally melt your brain.
They literally melt your brain. And some of these people who go into cyberspace die. And if you look back, what Gibson was trying to do, it was a metaphor for that time. He was saying, look, there is this other world out there, but actually it's the zone we're beginning to live in now, where these giant corporations are ignoring the old systems of power and creating their new systems. He was way ahead of his time.
The question now is, if we can draw parallels between the Soviet Union and what it was like to live under the Soviet Union as it atrophied, right? Slowly collapsing, or as the system got old at least. The question now is, what does it look like, or what happens when a system gets old and atrophies, right? And what does late stage capitalism, neoliberalism, which is what black people live under in America, what does that look like for the black community when the black community is forced to engage with that system? How do black people start to think and sound, especially about other black people? That's the question, right? So we'll pause right here and let's continue. What I posit is the current environment is the zone, right? The internet and social media are even more extreme versions of the zone, right? And when Adam Curtis says you're never quite sure what direction you're going in, right? You can never be sure of what is real and what's not real. I want us to think about some of the people that we engage with, both in person, in real life, your family, your friends, associates, co-workers, right? And even the people that we engage with online and how they sound. Sometimes it does seem like there's a blurring of the lines of what is real and what is not real, right? Remember, detached from reality. I want us to think about that, right? That's some of what we see going on in the black community, just people completely detached from reality, right? I also want us to think about this other thing that Adam brings up, which is ICE, right? The being jacked into cyberspace, ICE, which to me sounds like social media and how people are jacked into the internet, right? If you're not quite fast enough, right, your mind will get mangled. Your mind will melt, right? It will melt your brain, right? And what does that look like, right? For black people, look how we see black people responding on the internet to different people, right? When some of these content creators and or their followers, subscribers speak, do you not hear a mangled mind or a melted brain, right? That's something to think about for black people. So
also, what do you guys see happening in the near future, both positive and negative, with just the speed of change, the speed of technology, and how people are reacting to it, especially in the black community, right? This interview was very good. It could have easily, I could have easily made a hour-long video on this, but these are some of the extenuating circumstances that's affecting the black community, and that helping, at least, to cause a rift, right, or exacerbating an already rift that existed in the Black community, from class issues to gender issues, right? But yes, this is definitely something I think that needed to be talked about. I don't see many people kind of going down this direction, so I thought it was important that I bring this to y'all. And once again, y'all let me know what y'all think in the comments. Mr. Z out. I'll pause right there.